All right, yeah, I was unmuted. I'm muted now.
Oh, there you are.
We have a quorum, right, Deb?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and call this August 31st Ag Planning Tourism meeting to order. First order of business is to accept the minutes from the July 19th. So moved by Brian, second by Dave O'Brien. Any comments? All in favor, say by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Next order of business is septic system replacement program discussion. I'm going to let Laura Oswald quickly bring us up to speed on this and then get into further discussion.
So you may recall that last year we agreed to participate in a DEC program that would replace septic systems in very specific areas, which is along the shores of Lake George and around Costa and Corinna's office at Soil and Water kindly offered to handle the administration of this, and that helped much by Al Nolette and a lot of mailings that went out. So overall, there were about 310 parcels that were eligible for the funding, which would provide up to $10,000 for septic system replacement as a 50-50 match. So if the septic system was $70,000, they still only got $10,000. There was a process that was undertaken. The Treasurer's Office mailed out letters to all of the applicants. Corinna and I both fielded a lot of phone calls. We ultimately got about 40 responses. And then after that, I think it became pretty difficult to kind of keep things going because there was a lot of back and forth, maybe some misunderstanding from participants as to whether they were eligible or not, what they had to do, what they had to provide. So to date, I think we've actually only got a handful of applicants that have actually proceeded to the eligible to get reimbursed. So with that in mind, DEC contacted us and offered us another $450,000. So we got together as a group to discuss why it had been so difficult to move the first $250,000 forward. And, you know, kind of without rehashing that whole conversation, what we concluded was we needed to find a way to make it easier for Soil and Water to manage this because it was just way too burdensome. And one of the ways that we can do that is the language in the septic system program that was actually put out by DEC. There is some interpretation that can be applied to that. It's not all necessarily black and white. So the concept overall, I think, was to try and find a way to, A, automate the process a little bit more, create a set of guidelines that were able to automatically establish eligibility without Soil and Water or anybody else having to do a bunch of back and forth. There were issues with, in order to be determined eligible, your septic system had to have failed. You had to prepay for engineering, and then if your system didn't fail, you weren't eligible, and you were out those costs, et cetera. So all of those things, I think, made it fairly burdensome to administer. So the group discussion, we proposed a couple of changes, and John Graham from Codes also participated in that discussion that might make it a little bit easier. And in your packets, Corinna also provided some alternative proposals, but let me first mention what we talked about. I said that the guidelines established within a 200-foot boundary of Lake George or Costa shoreline, but it also allows us to include septic systems that have the reasonable potential to adversely impact those water bodies. So we thought that if we were to create some definitions that would add some of the tributaries going into Costa and Lake George, and also there was some discussion about looking at the Summit Lake watershed, which also drains into Costa. So again,
it's not directly connected.
It's not. Okay, we talked about that, but we weren't sure.
It is not directly
okay.
Connected. I looked that up.
Okay. So at this point, it would then just be the addition of the tributaries that
Yeah. They're like, that was on their application. We have no idea what the septic system is.
Yeah, I
And
think,
and you look on the parcel later under image mate and you look to see like how long they've owned that property, and they've owned it for, or they may have said on the application that they've owned it for 30 years and they've never done anything. They don't know where it is. That type of application is like, okay, do you fund it? Do you send them a letter back and say, please, call a septic company and see what you can find out for information?
I think where Laura went on, if you said, if your septic predates 1990, that they get over 30 years old, they
Yep.
could just check that box.
Yep.
And we're thinking, you know, at 30 years, the likelihood of that failing is pretty good. If that
Yep.
works to get us to the next level, that's all it takes, instead of people having to spend money.
Yep.
And you can accept the application that way, that makes a lot of sense. to me.
It does
Streamline
make
the
sense,
application.
yes.
I think we would have to require some indicate, because some people buy houses and they don't know how old the septic system is. So you'd have to have some, so either they've owned the parcel for long enough that it meets the age, or they have some documentation, or we might be back to inspecting. But I don't think we could rely just on, I say my septic system is more than 30 years
How
old.
long ago did code enforcement get called? What year was that? Right around that same era, right?
I know,
Yeah, so if code enforcement doesn't have something that says, you already know, because it's just
And
prior to that.
that's the whole, like, create a system where you don't
We
have to
don't
like
have-
get in, yes, no, maybe, just
Right.
make it as automated as possible to take the burden off of them.
Jay, go ahead.
One thing we have around our lakes too that, excuse me, might qualify them. A lot of ours were built as seasonal camps. Now they're year rounds. The septics were no way designed for year rounds. So if you have one that's changed that over time.
The status has changed. Can't be coming here.
so like a year, the years camp may have gone from being a seasonal to a year round. You know? And
There's still
but-
going to
but
be all
other
the
thing
engineering
would
for
be-
new system.
The other question that would go with that though is, did you update the system when you went down?
That
Because
would
we're
be in the-
working from the assumption that,
But that would be in the code enforcement thing if they got updated. If there's no record of it, it's
Yeah.
just as if it never happened.
right. I mean, you're working from the assumption that anything that we don't know anything about is an automatic failure, which I would say 95% of the time
It's true.
is true. But there could be some that, you know, there really isn't an issue. You know, people, there were a couple applications where they had done work on their septic systems 5 years ago. And they just thought that they would do an upgrade and get reimbursed for it, even though there wasn't a failure. So,
I mean, we should try to make it as easy as possible if they're gonna give us this money to hand out. Obviously, something that's
Yeah.
just worked on, but let's make it simple and.
you know, that, yeah, and I agree that
But some,
there should be like a checklist form that we could put on the county
but sometimes it's like
website.
red flag at the bridge. You did something to get it to work, but it still needs to replace it. I mean, it could be that type of.
Well, we thought, again, another way to help the whole process was, I haven't talked to her yet, but was to work with IT to create an online form that says, you know, check these boxes. Do you have this documentation? Did you do this? Did you know, like, help pre-qualify as much as possible without Corinna or me having to play, let's answer 50 questions, like get them.
Because the
Yeah.
technology exists, the minute your checks no, a window comes up that says you are not eligible. So the
Right.
technology exists based on your answers to the questions.
And if somebody is actually, I mean, what you were saying, Brian, if they're working with code enforcement, I'm not sure they can actually just kind of do a Band-Aid approach to something. they're gonna have to, you know, if they have a problem, they're gonna have to fix it to meet code enforcement
Right,
requirements, period, end of sentence.
but some of them that might have done work 5 years ago didn't necessarily go through code, they just did the work. Especially if they're over, nobody sees them.
They wouldn't be eligible right now.
What's that?
They wouldn't be eligible for the city.
They'd be twice as eligible because there'd be no record that it was ever there.
Well, are you talking about somebody that's out in the general landscape or on Cassian Lake?
I'm talking on the lake. Some of those are back in, tucked in where you don't see what's going on.
I think the important thing to remember is that it's not like it's no cost to the owner.
Right, it's
The
still
owner's
50%.
gonna have a significant cost
Yeah.
to replace it. So if
50%
you
up
have
to
a brand
10,000.
new system, I
Right.
can't imagine you just wanna put money in.
Well, yeah, if the person is really looking to do it, they know they've got a problem if they're willing to pay 50%. That's, to me, that's the number
Well,
one
some
thing.
of them are gonna be paying way more than.
Yeah,
Right,
because if it's more than a
$10,000,
$20,000 system, they're
So if
paying
they're
more
willing
than
to
that.
pay, they know they got a problem.
They're gonna be putting in a minimum of $30,000 system.
Some
So,
of them,
right, most likely, so.
Especially around Lake George, I mean, some of them are headed to blast rock.
So the other piece to this is if anybody was able to take a look at the various ideas that Corinna came up with in terms of timing. You know, there's a variety of ways to do that, but I think, at least it's my opinion, that if we're able to work with Terry to create an online system, we've pretty much automatically created a first come, first served situation. Because if you're the first one to get all of your papers submitted, I mean, not just order of application, but order of everything that is required is completed and has been done.
The website's gonna pre-qualify it.
So and we had 40 properties who initially qualified on roughly 350 properties, so about 12%.
Yeah. And how many of those, Corinna? We're only like one or two are completed, right?
Yeah,
And how many in the pipeline? Was that a
a
handful, right?
handful, yeah. And I've gotten a couple more, people that have, emailed me about doing systems this summer that are in process.
But we would need to have at least 65 applicants in order to send all of them. Oh, I'm sorry,
Right.
70 applicants in order to send them.
I just think it would be really good to have some deadline dates instead of have it be a revolving thing. Because one of the big questions is, when am I going to get my money? Because people do not understand grant processes. They get impatient. I've had numerous applications where I have one person that is contacting me via email. I have another person that's calling me on the phone. And they're in the same project. So I have like 4 people bothering me. I don't know if Laura's found that, but I have paperwork in my office and I have 4 people bothering. I have engineers that have reached out to me on behalf of owners, and then Joe Nicola has an agent.
So
Joe
Al, can I ask you
Nicola
this?
doesn't, you know,
Once
and
completed
so-
paperwork is all turned in, like all the receipts, everything, what's the average turnaround time that we're able to pay them?
So the turnaround, once
From
I get
EFC, and this is EFC funding, not EPC funding.
7 to 10 days.
So
Yeah.
could we just say payment will happen within 2 weeks of accepted submission of all required paperwork
30 days.
or 30 days?
Because
Well,
then you're not
if you-
concurrent, and I would be
If you are looking
concerned.
at the timelines, there's like a 2-month, I've given them a timeline to get their project done. And then once they've got their paperwork submitted, it's within 2 months that they can, you know, get reimbursed.
The only promise that we can make them is that within 48 hours of receipt of the state funds, the funds will be dispersed to them. That promise we can.
So I guess which of your proposals, A, B, or C, do you think would work best?
depends on how many people, like, if we are gonna do something as a committee where we have some input from John, code enforcement, and you, Laura, or if, I mean,
Which I think we all agreed we would do.
yeah, I mean, I could see either doing a once a year, or the comment was made about, well, you have a lot of summer residents that don't necessarily get mail where they are in the winter or whatever, to do the biannual one, but I think we should just pool applications for a certain period, go through them and review them, and send them their letters saying that they can go ahead, and then they're started in the process.
Well, I think your timeline A pretty much, you can send an application whenever you want, but we have a deadline.
Yeah,
Dave?
and
So
if so, yeah, sorry.
here's my comment. My comment is, if you have up to 70, reporting them after April 1st, or April 30th. Then what it starts, it's clogging the vendor a certain time frame. If you do it twice a year, then it's gonna get more spread over time.
Agreed.
So I think that was the biggest problem. And it also would help you in doing the applications. How many applications you had, you may have 50 by August and 30 by April 1st. But you may want to carry over something from 50 into the second part. But I think twice a year is better. Just so there's not, everyone's not trying to book the same vendor all the time.
Yeah, and if somebody, you know, has an application that, or for some reason, it's not quite complete, they don't have a design or whatever, they can reapply the second time. The problem with like once a year where, you know, you have somebody that submits an application on April 2nd because they just got up here and they just saw it or whatever, and then they are gonna be extremely upset. Be told, well, you have to wait until your application's gonna wait until next year. So to do the biannual would kind of keep that, and I would hope that it would also keep it where, you know, it might be 10 or 15 applications that you're reviewing in April, 10 or 15.
So the other question I had was, when you're reviewing the applications, they come in to make sure they have the information they need of them.
Yep.
She triages those now.
Yeah.
Now, I'm gonna throw something out there that Corinne's gonna hate, but I would love to see these reviewed once a month, like you do with your audit committee. I would like to see whether it's me, Corinna, and John, John, and Melissa, some group convenes one day a month for a half hour and reviews the ones that we've got that month, so that each month these things are getting chipped away at instead of, I know that that's a time suck for you, and I apologize in advance, but for the participants, I think if you could meet monthly and review the applications that have come in, everything is, because the EFC doesn't mind one-offs. I can send one all day long. They don't need them in batches. It's more of her having to come to the county building. But for the participants, if they're reviewed monthly, the first 70 that go through that process are the 70 that participate. We're not having to batch them all once or twice a year and then playing God over who's gonna be first in, first out. Monthly, you're looking at who qualifies for this program. Nobody's gonna be more than a month out from their completion date.
You have an IT process, you're already,
You pre-screen.
Shouldn't have to
spend as much
do a
time.
lot of
yeah.
time reviewing.
Yeah, I don't think it
because
should be more than a half hour.
Yeah,
I'd like to see them.
I think having dates on like the application form or the website or something gives people a guideline. And also like having the PDFs of whatever forms that they need to do. So the reimbursement form,
And I could make all that available on my page easily.
Right, so that when they know that they've been accepted, they have all the materials they need. It's not a continuous, oh, I gotta send them this, I gotta send them that, I gotta send them this. Because kind of the way EFC set it up, it's like, they want you to have mail going back and forth.
Continuous communication.
And as far as I'm concerned, if we have one signature involved from the landowner involved with their entire application reimbursement packet, we're covered.
Yeah, I may have a series of questions based on the answers. But is there this designated committee, is there a priority given to people with income hardships or low level? No?
No, I don't believe so.
So
No.
is there
It
more
has
than enough,
nothing to do with income.
is there more than enough money available to take care of all the applications?
We have
received today?
700, well, if we accept the next batch of money, which is 450,000, we'll have $700,000. When we last spoke, we had only given out 10,000,
7,500
7,500.
So we have more money than we do applications.
Yes.
currently. And there's the maximum exposure, Mr. Hogan, is 310. That's how many people were in that eligible area.
Yep.
Out of that 310, 40 sent letters of interest. And then from that 40, there was a screening of, you already did this, you don't qualify. And that now is down to like 7, one of which has actually completed the process. So we have more money than we have interest currently.
So Laura, a couple of years ago, were you involved on, we had a septic system fail in the Champlain Canal a couple of years ago. Do you have to recall this one without getting too specific on the geography? Somebody helped us, and this gentleman, it was a financial issue for him, but we were able to help him do some grant process. I thought he worked with the county.
You may have, I just
It may
don't
not have been
remember.
this one, but it was helpful. But as long as if we don't have a financial concern right now with the volume of funds. The thing that would trouble me is that we have Lake George and Casa Una. Those are typically properties, they should be able to handle this on their own, I would think, if they're gonna own homes on in those areas. But that's not an issue financially, then.
We probably will expand from the 310 that were mailed out, not by a huge amount, but if we include the tributaries going into Casa Una Lake George, it'll increase that number somewhat, but based on the first round, we clearly had more money than we had eligible prepared applicants, let's put it that way.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, so I think basically it's about the water and preserving the lakes. I think is
I got all that,
I think that's,
but my question was, if we didn't have enough money,
yeah,
I would ask
So-
that this designated committee, I don't know who that would be, I don't know who that is, could we create a
Work-
priority for folks who, create another worker, a priority for those folks who may need financial assistance more so than somebody up on Lake George. That's all.
So
But
the
it doesn't seem like that's necessary at this time.
The committee was, the initial one that met was Corinna, Al, myself, Melissa, and James. Do you have anybody else that you would like to see added to
Brian Campbell.
There's tributaries and even they went into Casa Una.
so there might be. So my bigger question is, I think coming in year round is good, but is anybody absolutely gonna work on any of these systems between November and March 1st?
So the application isn't the work, don't confuse the two.
No, I'm just saying, I don't mind them coming in all the time, but they can't do work between sometime in November and March 1st, no matter what. And I don't know that you guys need to take everyone's time in those few months to get there, you know.
Let them handle it. Sure.
Go ahead.
And Brian, there's two touch points, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
Right, the first one is qualifying. So the first thing that you do is say, we reviewed your application and you have been awarded up to $10,000. That's the first touch point with the applicant.
Okay.
And then there's a second touch point when they get all their engineering and it's all done, and then you review the documents and submit it. So there's two different times that you would have that group, whatever it's going to be. if you believe that the recommendation is that a group of us should sit down and review these, if you're on board with that, there's 2 times that we would have a touch point with the applicant. The first one would be, yes, your system is eligible, you're eligible up to 10. So there's a letter that goes out that says you have been selected to participate in this program. So we would want to help Corinna with that phase of it. And then we would see the same applicant again after the thing has been engineered, designed, completed. Now we're able to tell them, okay, you have been awarded $8,700 based on the cost of your design that will be submitted to the state, and you'll be paid within 7 days of receipt of those monies. So there'll be two touch points with that applicant.
So with that being said, is there a point where code enforcement is involved in this, just like they would any other time?
He has been part of this internal staff.
But I mean, they still have to go through code and get everything.
The permit is still part of the process. And some of the people didn't participate because they knew we had codes right. So.
That was a big question on Cassiano Lake, was, well, if I get my system inspected and
And I can't afford
and
it.
it passes and I can't afford it, am I obligated to do something about it? And that's.
If it passes, what would you have to do?
If it fails.
She said that's what she meant. Yeah.
That, so some people are just, they don't wanna know.
But then wouldn't they not be participating in this?
But then,
And we
yeah,
only
they
do
wouldn't
this
send
if
an
you-
application.
Right, that's good, right.
They're choosing to just not address it.
A triage
Until
like
they
that.
absolutely have to.
Just judge.
I had a question, I guess, if we went to your world of the application review every month, so the only deadline we would need then, or we wouldn't even have a deadline, we would just say the applications would be reviewed twice a year, right? We wouldn't have the series of deadlines.
All applications are reviewed on a monthly basis.
Right, you might give them a date on,
Maybe we do
on the
that.
first of the month or the first Monday of the month, whatever, you give them, because you'd have to be reviewed and then processed after that.
Everything received on by the last day of the month will be
Right.
reviewed in the month following.
Yeah, that might be best.
I think the goal is just to get this money out to people that need it, right? To keep the water clean. That's the
Yeah.
ultimate goal. So
So you're
we
trying to
shouldn't
save
be
the two
making it-
links.
Well, if we only end up with 10 people that are eligible, then
We get the money back.
Well, probably then the money gets transferred.
they'll reallocate. I think that's
Yeah,
what-
they'll reallocate it to another.
I think that's what the 450 was unspent money from the first.
And what happened, I got a letter from DEC, which I think is actually from EFC, right? Saying that you were awarded that first amount of money. So now we want to offer you $450,000 and you have to let us know by next week. Well, we didn't have committee meetings at that in between, so I contacted him and asked for an extension for that. In the meantime, got some information from Corinna, found out some from Al, got Laura involved, so that's how we ended up meeting to try to see if we could find a way to administer this a little easier than we were doing, without causing Corinna a lot of extra work.
So actually, I do have a question. One thing, if we are going to establish those set of criteria, if we are going to use age of system as a criteria, I think I'd like to get agreement as to what number. Is it 30 years? Is it 35 years? In discussions with John Graham, he agreed that 30 years is a reasonable number, as is 35. So what is the committee's pleasure? What number should we use?
30 years. Well, I'd give it do you give it an actual date or just 30 years? Or some because.
Well, it would be
keeps changing. So that would be-
pre-1982.
No, 92.
No, he's saying because the grant's good for 2 more years.
Right, so you put 30 years and then you think 92 and then it'd be 93, 94,
30 years.
and that way they can check any of the stuff. You know, if they want to know how old it is, because the code is already there.
We need to vote on any of this.
The other thing,
That would be yes.
Right. So for a time reference, we're talking age 30 years.
Automatically qualified.
Automatic qualifies. Motion, Brian. Second Matt. Any further dialogue? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Second thing is tributaries. Are we agreeing to use tributaries into,
Yes.
Saying,
Yeah, because it's the only way you're gonna get the numbers.
Can we, because we've got the first round of funding, it's largely unused yet, and then we're getting another round of funding, and that's gonna go out another year because that contract won't start until it's with the state. Maybe for like the next 2 years, we do concentrate basically on what EFC's guidelines and DEC. Because I have talked to a guy from DEC and he's really not into like tributaries, but I think, if we get into it and we say, okay, we've hit the majority of what your initial guidelines are, maybe in another year after we get this smoothed out or whatever, you go back and you revisit and say, okay, because we still have money left, we pull in the tributaries, or 2 years from now. At some date in the future, I wouldn't do that maybe right then. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's something.
He's got 2 lakes in his town. I mean, is it just those 2 that are relevant?
Yeah.
That's-
right now.
Just right now.
They probably will expand it if it works.
Right.
Well, it's all based on DEC guidelines,
Right.
and
Okay.
we
didn't have a
don't
choice.
make that.
Okay.
There's probably several around Casino that qualify whether the people want to.
Right.
You would think going not Lauderdale, things like that, you'd expect.
We can't change that thing of Casino Lake and Lake George, that's DEC.
Thoughts on tributaries? Go with.
I'd go with
suggestion?
them. Well, I think,
We're gonna suggest is we don't go with it.
I like the suggestion that you
Not-
wait,
not immediately.
but I think because you're getting so little participation, I'd do it right away because I don't think you get enough people.
And the fact is pollution, your tributaries are definitely
Yeah,
into
if
the
the
lakes
tributary
anyway,
carries down
right?
the lake, you're just as bad off.
It's just,
One thing that you could consider is Melissa's gonna look to you for a motion to accept the second round of funding. You could say that the second round of funding would be eligible for tributaries. That would make you finish up the first 250. If you're lucky enough to get through the first 250, then maybe consider tributaries. And the second 450, you could make that as part of the direction to Melissa to accept
So
the
those
second.
people, not to, sorry.
No, you're fine.
So that means, what if that 250 doesn't go very quickly? And then you have that application, it's just gonna sit there for a year and a half until we exhaust.
Then you can
that
come back to
250.
committee
We can come back to
and
committee
open
and-
it back up.
Right.
I'm just thinking about the people that are putting in their applications, that's all.
Well, I just wanna make sure that we take care of the first 25 people first before we open up.
Well,
That's
you're
my
gonna
only
take the
concern.
first 25 people first anyways, whether they're tributary or actually on the lake.
But let's make sure there isn't 25 eligible on the lake. Because there was a lot of people that thought they had to have the project done by December, not the people were in by December.
If the
So
deadlines got.
there
continued.
was, we definitely want to reach out to those 310 again. Would be my recommendation. There was some really, they didn't understand the program as it was laid out. So I want to make sure that people, we know for a fact that some people didn't submit an application because they didn't think they could have the project done by December, and that wasn't what the requirement was. So we want to, there needs to be a second outreach to that 310. My concern was that people on the lake, which was the original intention of the grant, I wanted to make sure that they were taken care of first, but again, that's just my interpretation of the paperwork that came from DEC.
Melissa, do you want a motion that accepts the second round of funding?
Yes, if I could sign this letter and return that so we get that 450
Is it
available.
through this committee or does it have to go to finance?
Just here.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second by Brian. Are we gonna include what you had stated there, that the tributaries are included in the second, the second round of funding?
Or we can always come back to this committee to open it up if we feel that. If we can't get a 25 out the door, we can always come back.
But if we included it, why couldn't you just decide? You could hold those back and not, right? You wouldn't have to approve the ones where tributaries if you still have ones on the lake. But if you've got nothing in your, there, and then make them move.
Just remember that any of the outreach we do is a county cost. So if you want me to go back out to the 310 and now the tributaries, you're gonna pay for all of that, letters, envelopes, postage. I just, full disclosure, that's all county costs, the outreach. Okay, just be aware that, you know, if I have to mail more, it costs more, then that's fine, but just so that you're on board with that extra cost. It's not a huge cost, but it's a cost.
You don't want to price up.
Envelopes are gonna be.
Yeah.
I can tell you what I just paid, and it's not. The paper hasn't been the problem, it's been the envelopes,
Once we get started, it's gonna be electronic, because you want the survey to be electronic.
but that'll be the pre-screening will be electronic.
Right, but you still gotta send the.
The letter
You
goes
still need a piece
first,
of paper,
then everything's electronic.
it's still all paper after,
Probably do the survey online on paper.
but all the application process is all paper.
Okay.
The pre-screening will keep people from putting an application in that don't.
That's a point of order. So are we including the tributaries in this resolution or not?
How many tributaries are there?
I would say there's 6 or 7 on Casa. Probably at least that many on Lake George. Might be twice that many on Lake George. It just,
Yes.
the thing of it is, this is supposed to be within the guidelines of how this lines. And if you include the language of the tributaries with 450,000 in the resolution, are they gonna look at it in the contract and kick it back and say that's not what we want this money spent for?
Yeah, don't know unless you try. Kick it up, say yes.
I'll tell you.
Hey, use the money. You got the money. Use it.
I'd use it. I think it's for the good of the lake. It doesn't matter if you're half a mile or 2 miles from the lake, if it's running into the tributary and that's running into the lake, you're in trouble.
Totally agree.
And just to reiterate, the language in our contract specifically says within a 200-foot boundary of Lake George or Lake Cosiona, or parcels with reasonable potential to adversely impact those water bodies.
So we don't need to put it in the resolution.
It's already
there.
It's already there.
Well, Corinna wanted
We will,
direction.
I think we want it in the resolution to help establish eligibility for applicants, but we don't need it for DEC.
You just had to read that to the group of people to get that aha moment.
Right,
Applicants may not get it
unless it's right.
no one's included.
Yeah.
Say yes, everybody say yes.
Included. Yeah. All right. Motion by Matt, second by Brian, as amended.
Motion.
No, the original motion, Matt just.
Oh, going yes, no, something, I don't know.
You even made the
Okay,
motion.
something.
You made the motion.
With
Yeah.
the.
Jay already made it.
I just said Matt made the amendment, second by Brian.
So we're voting on the amendment.
Okay, voting on the amendment. Yeah, all in favor, somebody say aye. Aye. Voting on the original motion, all in favor, somebody saying aye.
As amended.
As amended.
Aye.
Aye.
Or did you get all this?
It'll be done.
Close enough, yeah. Good job.
To,
Go ahead.
at the risk of having something thrown at me, does the committee also, do you want me to open up the eligibility now? To get the 250 up,
It's
and not wait.
It's
for the
stated in
In the
there,
resolution.
right, so,
Well, who I reach out to is gonna matter on what you say to that question.
Well, no, we're.
I'm gonna do outreach, but I'm not gonna outreach to the tributaries unless you tell me.
I think I think that if their septic reasonably reasonable potential to adversely impact, yes. It's stated in there, that's in the current,
But I mean, the motion you just passed was for the second round.
okay,
I'd like to know if you'd want to include it in the first round as well.
So there needs to be a clarification on that word. What if I am not on the lake, but I am up on the side of a mountain and my runoff runs down into the lake? Does that qualify?
Green his house does.
Does that qualify?
Mine runs down the other side of the hill.
Oh, okay.
It's the cow patch. Does that qualify?
Yes, reach out to everybody.
Yeah, it does.
Reach out to them.
But that does
More the
fall.
merrier, let's get this thing done as much as we
Get the
can,
money out.
positive environmental impact, spend the
Right.
state's money ASAP.
I like.
Yeah, but we don't want to kill Corinna, I'm just saying.
So one thing that I was thinking of that could be on the website is to actually have a map of the two areas, Casino Lake and maybe.
A parcel
could do
map.
Oh,
something-
highlight the zone
Something
that.
that highlights the parcels that would be eligible.
Or there could be a
And on,
GIS map.
and on Lake
Yeah,
George.
yes, everyone.
Lauren nodded yes.
Dave Trump,
If I don't know.
You know, and then, you know, somebody could possibly zoom in on it and say, oh, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah,
Visual, people love visuals.
You want a motion for? Okay.
I have my marching.
All right. We good? All right, are we good? All right, thank you. All right, tourism updates.
Okay, first thing would be the fair. For those of you who stopped by and visited us, you know that we changed from the former Grange building over to the County Bounty building, which I think was a very positive change. We got, I think, a lot more exposure than we had in the other building. We put out the trails cards that we've been working on, the visitors guides, the haunted history guides, all the brochures and information that we have about farmers markets, all the family fun days, etc. As is continuing this trend, the thing that we ran out of was the haunted history brochures. I mean, those just, we ran out of them.
Hey, come back to ask for more money.
Yes.
I gotta believe that it's something that I wouldn't even give a rat's whatever about, that's the thing they look for, because I just wouldn't trust me.
It's funny because Laura and I have been talking about this for years. I don't know.
I had people tell me stories about their experiences and why this is a good thing, and it is a hot topic. So, you know, the fact that we have venues in the county that are participating in that, I think went over very well.
You're telling me that was more popular than the Easton Comprehensive Plan? Really?
The Eastern Conference fan was a horror.
It was on the easel. I offered to bring it over.
So of the other literature that we had out, I ran a little experiment in that, as you know, we have, or at least I hope you know, we have the 9 trails, the ice cream trail, the fiber trail, the history trail, all the rest of them. So I took unopened boxes to the fair because I wanted to get a feel for, is one of them disappearing faster than the others? Well, the craft beverage trail was the top one, but that kind of makes sense because we were in the County Bounty building with all the craft beverage producers. But following close behind that were just only slightly higher, the ice cream and the cheese trail. Yeah, those
But the haunted trail one was gone?
we ran out of
That's
those.
all, right, yeah.
We ran out of them, yeah.
So just to your point there, so I was up in Lake Placid this past weekend, and obviously I grab all the brochures and pamphlets, whatever's free. And inside the centerfold was all, inside the Adirondacks, all the craft breweries, wineries, and ice cream shops in the entire Adirondack Park.
All together.
Beer and ice cream?
No, but it was to have all 3 of those trails kind of on one map,
On one map.
right in the middle of the book. Yeah,
It's coming.
just to show.
Which one's your call?
They don't intersect, it didn't make it.
Whichever
That's when you
one
do find where they all
ice cream
cross,
was
right?
close to the beer, so the kids could get
Right
ice
there.
cream and.
Yeah.
They could get beer.
Sorry.
The other thing I heard time and time again was I had no idea there was so much to do in Washington County. People, you know, both residents and non-residents, when they started picking up some of those cards and we'd show them how to use the QR codes and how to look at the website. We just had a lot of people who say, I had no idea that we could do all of these things. The other thing that was very, very popular was the video. We had, I can't tell you how many businesses that we have either directly promoted through some of the videos or who had seen them. Just say that they think they're great. And if you haven't seen it, the latest video, and just as a reminder, we're doing a video related to each and every one of the 9 trails. The latest one is the ice cream trail that is posted on the tourism website. So if you want to take a look at ice cream and slaver over it, then go take a look at the video. The other thing to mention that I think is really great news, as you know, the Cheese Tour is coming up September 11th and 12th. The Cheese Tour actually hired a marketer to help promote that. That marketer was actually able to get the cheese video that we produced aired on News 13. So it ran on a local news station a couple of times over it was National Wine and Cheese Day. So we've got a lot of publicity out there. The only other update I have for you is the next event that we're going to work on is planning on the short-term rental event, which is essentially going to be get together with those properties that are managing short-term rentals, businesses that sort of want to interact with them. How do we create welcome packages? What best practices they're going to be, and yes, I remember. So that event is probably going to be in November. We're meeting next week to start planning that. But the idea is to capitalize on the only sort of overnight stays that we have in the area.
We initially thought maybe we'd do it in the fall, but fall is still a very busy time for those individuals that are hosting Airbnb. So the time after Columbus Day until Veterans Day is pretty much their downtime, because then they'll get back into Thanksgiving and the holiday season. So we think that that'd be a good time, sometime in between then, to be able to host something like that.
And we've had a lot of run into a number of Airbnb hosts who have seen, how can we better connect with both things to do in the county, products there are to offer in the county, et cetera. So part of that is how do we make sure that those entities are all connected. So any questions on that?
Laura?
But Tim,
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're working on our short-term rental law in the town of Fort Anne right now. And one of our providers has indicated they have a listing of 50 plus short-term rentals in just the town of Fort Anne alone. So we have more out there in the county than I think we really realize that we have, but they just haven't been identified yet.
I think in previous conversations, when we sort of mapped based on, we subscribe to the capital region to some short-term rental data. And I think we've pretty clearly established in the past that Fort Anne is actually the #1 location of short-term rentals in the county. Fort Anne definitely has a higher number of them than any of the other towns, like by far.
Sam, are you listing them, regulating them? You're gonna have a database of them?
Yeah, that's what we're in the process of doing.
Can we make sure that they're all paying the tax?
well,
If we get the list from them?
we only have an agreement with Airbnb.
No, but if we get can we tell Airbnb, by the way, you're missing these guys?
They're not missing them.
Okay.
They automatically do it, but
Okay.
that brings on the conversation of enacting an actual occupancy law on any short-term rentals.
So before we bring that up, just to clarify that, a significant number of those rentals in the town of Fort Anne are listed on Airbnb, and we are not collecting short-term rental taxes.
So where we're missing revenue is not having an agreement with Virgo. And I know Laura's been working really hard to try to get an agreement with Virgo, but without the county creating a law, that would then force Virgo to come into an agreement with us. They don't have to enter.
Did I just give you a segue?
It actually would have to be the state enacting that law, and there are lobbyists. We now belong to a state industry tourism association. They give us a really good deal. And so that gives us access to their lobbyists who are continuing to work on state legislation that will require occupancy tax collection from all short-term rentals.
So, yeah, back when I was sharing, maybe we brought this up, and I thought Roger told us that the time it would take us to try to push through for a Washington County through the legislature that they'll have something enacted by then. So are we gonna try to push something through on your next thing on the agenda here, or are we gonna wait for the state?
Here's the hard thing is, if we do, who does the collection of the 700 plus properties that are, when we'd have to collect the occupancy tax on? That'd be Al and his team?
No, supervisors of the town.
That's the hard part. You know, that's where Warren County, they initiated an occupancy tax law, but they have, you know, a whole department, you know, the tourism department, that's, you know, one person is going through and, you know, reconciling that on a monthly basis.
They get millions.
They get
You're right.
millions.
So we through Airbnb, we did 115,000, 120,000 in the first year. Okay, through Airbnb up there, they're doing 2 million in revenue generation, 2 million through Verbo, 3 million through the hotels. They get $7 million in occ tax.
So they got Verbo
They
in agreement for.
they created a tax law for the county. Warren County created a tax law for the
So
county.
their local law actually.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
But it did have to get approved at the state level.
Oh, you gotta get a home rule request, right?
I believe so, but
That's the hard part.
right.
Yeah.
But they were also, when you have $3 million worth of occ tax and you have obviously a lot more money coming in, like they have a leg to stand on. We're missing $150,000 more. They're good. Okay.
Good for you.
Right. Right.
Yeah, our estimates are that we're probably losing out on about $100,000 worth of revenue from Verbo. There are other sites, there are camping sites, there are tenter sites, et cetera. So if, unfortunately, the legal compliance and administration cost of that would exceed the $100,000.
Currently include things like yurts and stuff like that, so.
It's all just through Airbnb, which Airbnb
I
does.
mean, our current local law, those guys are.
Right.
Off of that radar.
Right. Yeah, only bed and breakfast and hotels and hotel.
Housekeeping.
So actually, yes, we have to renew, well, I shouldn't say we have to, but we enacted an occupancy tax law in 2009, which is required to be updated every 3 years. And that is the law that allows us to collect the 4% from the bed and breakfast, from the couple of hotels that we have. And that 4% is similar to what we have worked with Airbnb on. But again, that's a voluntary tax collection. Historically, we have been collecting for the past couple of years, maybe $10,000 a year in bed tax revenue. And if we're going to continue to do that, the law has to be renewed it's up this year to be renewed for the next 3 year period.
Second by.
Yeah, was there any reason to want to change anything in it? Or just?
Well, I guess
Yeah, there's no reason to change anything in it, but I will call your attention to some language that is in our law that is based on state law that allows the treasurer's office to retain up to 15% of the tax collected to pay for administration of it. So over the past, that's the occupancy tax. So this is, again, it's worded as based on the occupancy tax law. That has generated, on average, between $2,000 to $5,000 in revenue that the treasurer has then been putting back into the general fund. Last year, because we are actually starting in 2021, because we added that $115,000 in Airbnb revenue to it, that caused the treasurer to move $18,000 in occupancy tax money back into general fund. So the discussion that I would like to have is at budget time, I have to request money to fund the tourism budget. And I'm not sure that it makes most sense to take that 20,000 or so in occupancy tax, put it in the general fund, and then have me come back and request tourism budget. So do.
Yeah, so what I'd suggest is he gets his 15% on occupancy tax And for what little he has to do with the Airbnb money, it's undeposited. I'd return that. I want tourism to pay for itself, like I think the board wants it to. I'd like to see the tourism money go back to tourism. So it does at some point pay for itself. And as it grows, it should. Sorry, Al. One guy's opinion.
So we need to.
That's an internal policy.
That's right.
Right.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's right in the law.
No, and that'll have to be discussed. Probably.
so when Al leaves, we get to fight over giving that new treasurer no money, all right?
Treasurer.
Can
Can we wait till the election?
He meant treasurer or new one.
You're back to 1500 instead of 18.
He's waiting,
Because
he's
of the
waiting like
2021
crazy.
money, is there a
So can I-
deadline?
No, he doesn't have any discussion on this.
I'd like to finish this motion first, but I do have a question on the post-motion discussion.
Okay. It's more to.
I think you've already gone past.
All in favor, aye.
So what I'm willing to do, believe it or not, is like you said, now, do you want me to recalculate 2021s so that it's only the 15% on occupancy? I'll do that.
Absolutely.
21.
Another tributary.
How do you do on that? How do you do 21s with the books closed?
Yeah.
Yes, that's my question.
I can do a reclass of the fund balance and put it into the reserve.
Start 22.
Okay,
Start 20.
I'm fine with that. I just wanted to throw that out as an option. Laura's like, what did you just say?
You gotta make you feel a little bad because you're gonna feel real bad when you take more ARPA money from broadband.
So there's-
We gotta kind of, you know.
Well, there's no harm in leaving it alone because you've already appropriated that money. So I just wanted to.
Right.
Okay.
I know it's shocking.
What do you-
So
Good try.
Yep, okay, so that was all I have. The only other update, just to let you know where we are on that Airbnb revenue. I think last time we talked about it, I said it was a little bit odd because our revenues were actually up in terms of gross revenues from Airbnb, but our tax collection was down. That equalized in January, so that now they are both up.
January, July.
In July, sorry. So that they're both now running about 2% above 2021 year over
When
year.
your July post,
It usually posts the second week
Second
in
week.
August. It was about 13,000 for July compared to 9,000 last year.
yeah, I didn't see July posted yet, so maybe that was just too early.
I just got it a few days ago, actually.
Right, yeah.
In any event, overall, year over year, we're up about 2% in both gross revenue and tax collection.
it's closer to the 21st.
Right, yeah, okay.
Is it the same as the mall scene?
What?
Revenue at the mall.
Revenue's finally going up because gas prices are going back down. People have money to spend on extras now, so we're definitely seeing,
Right.
retail is seeing an increase as, you know, but they were lagging through the summer months, but you're
One
doing a
thing
good
is the
month.
amount of people on the road hasn't like.
No, wherever you went, had like, hey, I went this summer, it's crazy. You all good, Laura?
Well, that's it.
Any other business for the, group? We're adjourned. Laura, I missed it, sorry.